Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for coming. We're sorry for the delay, technical stuff, you know. This is practically the first Agora talk of the 26th Thessaloniki Documentary Festival, and thank you all for being here. We're going to discuss what Mac very eloquently put, Animarchiving Reality, which is actually a beautiful title. I would like to introduce Ms. Kesmat Elsayed, producer from C Media Production. Thank you for coming. Johan Grimonprez, did I pronounce this right? Excellent. Filmmaker, multimedia artist, and curator. And late. No, that's all right. Aris Kaplanidis, with all these fantastic capabilities. They're director, screenwriter, music producer, illustrator from BrosInArts, which is the company. And Elias, who will be at the audience, but, you know, if you're asked anything, please answer. And last but not least, Marineta Kritikou, the Agora coordinator of ANIMASYROS. Thank you so much for being here, and I will pass on the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Thanos. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thank you to Agora team for having us here. Today I have the pleasure of being among very talented people, and I'm really honored. I'll try to do my best. So, because time flies and we don't have enough time and we have so many things to talk about, I would like to start quickly with topics that have to do with archives and animation and how these tools are used in order to tell a story, to make a documentary in a cinematic way. So I would like to start from Johan, maybe. Because he was late, he's punished. So we'll start from you. No, I'm just joking. Actually, the topics I would like to develop are the choice, approach, authenticity, data, rights. So if we have time, we'll go on with other subjects, but these are the main subjects that I would like to develop with you and discuss and have a dialogue about all these matters. So I will start with a choice. I know that yesterday you had your screening, your European premiere with the soundtrack of a coup d'etat. And it is a film based on archives. Everything, it was only archives. So first question is, what considerations guide your decisions in selecting and presenting archive materials to enhance the narrative impact of your films? How you choose and where you start. Do you start from archives to tell the story, or you start from a story and then you are looking for archives?
Well, archives is one of the tools. For me, it's something grabs me in the world, right? And you take it on as a story. And then archives is one part of it. Archives could be images, it could be audio. Because, for example, for soundtrack to coup d'etat, we had found presumed lost speeches by Patrice Lumumba, who was the first Congolese premier for the independent country of Congo. And so it depends. Like for this film, I don't know if people have seen it, which delves into the history, colonial history of my country. And so even there, when you talk about archives, you plug into a whole situation of power relationships. And so with George Ngzola Natalia, who says, you know, all that has been documented pre-independence is still actually in Belgium. And so you already delve into power relationships, right? So you already have sort of an ideological sort of cause you step into. That's one. It's also accessibility, some things you cannot access. But for example, a huge part of the archives came from the United Nations. Also from a lot of personal archives that are home movies. Amongst André Blouin, who's the freedom fighter, she gave graciously access to all her home movies. Also did in Collé Jean Bouffani, the Belgian Congolese novelist. And so to have access to those intimate stories that you cannot find anywhere else, but that are shot by sort of intimate, sort of belonging to the family history of a very intimate situation, is very different than, for example, access to data that's from BBC, or you say you go through Getty, which is a tough one. So immediately sit into the politics of money, production, etc. So archives is many things.
Yes, right. But now you're talking about access. I was actually wanted to know the first choice is access. Is access that drives you? No, it's not. I'm not.
But it's that story in the world, something that grabs my eye, or something. For example, for soundtrack to Curator, I knew that Nikita Khrushchev, the leader of, at the time in 1960, of the Soviet Union, he was slamming his shoe during the 15th General Assembly. He was slamming his shoe, but I thought it was sort of a moment that always mesmerized me, because Nikita Khrushchev had been part of a previous film where he functioned as a Hitchcock doubleganger in Double Take. And I had also in Shadow World, we had interviewed Muntazar al-Zaidi. I have some images of that, but we don't have to, and I don't want to overtake too much. Maybe it's time also for the other participants. But that image of the shoe as a political agent, I thought it was interesting, because it becomes part of slamming his shoe on the desk at United Nations. And I didn't know it was actually because of my colonial history. So he was upset about how Dag Hammarskjöld was dealing with the UN, dealing with the Congo through the UN, and trying to overthrow the first democratically elected premier. But you have also the shoe that Muntazar al-Zaidi, he was a Baghdadi journalist. When he heard that George Bush Jr. would come to Baghdad, he was ready with his shoe. And during an official press conference, he threw the shoe at George Bush. And we interviewed him, and he said the shoe suddenly had a voice. The shoe became sort of an emblem for talking about all the mishaps, and that the Iraqi people did not welcome George Bush with flowers, but bid him farewell with a shoe. And so the shoe became this archival image of a shoe, became for me a way to tell a story. So, for example.
Thank you. So I jumped directly to Kesmat because I'd like to know your point of départ. How do you start?
Okay, so I'm an Egyptian producer. When I first started my production company, I wanted to work on historic narratives, because we in Egypt we learn our history in school, and it's very much politicized. So I discovered studying political science that there's a lot that I didn't know. And that was my trigger point to start exploring how to make films that talk about my history, or to re-examine what I already knew. And in that way, archive became a very big part of this. And in Egypt, you don't have the access to archives. And also, we don't have an institution that collects, for example, private archives even. So you have like this street in Egypt where you sell a lot of old things, and some people sell even old pictures, and you don't even know the owners of that picture. And from that, I see a lot of violence, and as a young person I used to buy these pictures because I felt like they had meaning. So images and archive and old images for me are very precious. And when I started working on many projects, sometimes it was triggered by seeing a video online of something that I didn't know about, and discovering it through these images. So that's my trigger point in a way. But then as I start working on a project, I discover all these challenges of getting actually to use this archive into a film. And here, as you were saying, all the power dynamics start to present themselves, and all the limitations you find yourself trying to do a social impact or trying to basically claim your history, but actually being faced with a lot of obstacles. So I think
I'll come back to the obstacles, but now I would like also to have your experience on that, and also I would like to start talking about authenticity and accuracy of the information we got. I know that you have a lot of audio archive that you use for your project in development right now. So I would like to know a little bit about that. To talk,
yes.
Yeah.
It's not an audio archive, but it's actually transcriptions from oral accounts. But because I'm going to tell you about the trigger first. Our trigger for everything we do, not this because it's a documentary, is the way of speaking, the spoken language. So the oral accounts were something that once we came across was instant. We stuck instantly with them. So once we started to incorporate them into a story, the different stories and points of view of those women, the archive footage, the ones we had access to, the visual accounts, were very limited because the area of 1908 to 1922, with the history of the Asia Minor catastrophe, is minimally recorded in terms of visual material, except for the military operations on both sides and the political parties or that. So what we had to do in order to reenact the era and somehow simulate the form of the archive material as it's used in a documentary was to somehow draw archive footage from other sources. So, for example, one of the main agricultural ways of producing in Asia Minor was of tobacco, which there is no actual archive footage of them, but there is archive footage from Bangladesh. And talking to our historical advisor, he told us that this is the right cart, this is the right way of carrying the tobacco. This is not the right terrain. You have to use the terrain from a different source material, a different archive footage, in order to combine them and through animation recreate with a historical accuracy not only the specific part, but also the era and the sound of...
Just for the audience, because maybe they don't know,
of course.
Aris and Elias, they are developing a project that is an animated documentary. So they use animation in order to recreate scenes that are testimonies, that are based on testimonies.
The oral accounts of the women who survived the Asia Minor catastrophe.
Yes, this is the story, so just to make it clear. So, okay, so now I would like to go on with the authenticity. How can we, how is possible to be sure about the accuracy and the authenticity of the information we get? Because it's always the media, sometimes they control information, they give us what they want to give us. So how you proceed with that? Would you like to tell your experience?
But what do you understand under authenticity? Because authenticity is always in flux. A culture is always in flux in relation to another culture. So what's authenticity? So cultures are always also in flux. So that in itself is already, for me, a big question. For me, we had an interview earlier about truth and post-truth and what is reality and stuff. And I think it's relational. I think it's in relation to sort of where you can vet it with sort of like for Shadow World, we had to vet events in northern Syria about the chemical attacks. So we interviewed Seymour Hersh to know about sort of what is that. But if it's only one voice, can you trust it? So we vetted with Robert Fisk, which is another journalist, and asked him about the question. He said 95% it's accurate, that probably, you know, the chemical weapons came from Turkey and the CIA was involved and then they was delivered to ISIL. But we weren't sure, so we had to cut it out of the film. But I think it's in relation. Earlier we talking about, we interviewed for the same film Grimonprez, who's a neurologist. And we asked him about tickling. And tickling you cannot do yourself. Unless you're schizophrenic, you can laugh. But tickling, it's about the ontology of the other. And if somebody tickles you, you know that the other one exists. So it's about relationship. So the truth and authenticity is always in the relationship too, I feel. That would be my take. And it's the same with archives. You know, it's the archives in its relationship where you can easily sort of, like with a cartoon, you can place another voice under something that is a different image. So there's a décalage between audio and the image, or between the text that is on top of an image, and it can mean something else. So it's in relation that image or that voice or that piece of archive, as I call them stolen kids in the soundtrack to Curator. They're stolen kids who sort of have to create their belonging of where do they fit. And that's what creates the meaning. And it can sort of take off where you reinterpret it, like in a poetic, metaphorical sort of relationship where it's shifts into something new and it opens something up. Or you can also put it into a whole, like when Palestinians were jeering during 9/11, it was put on CNN, and it's as if they were jeering, but it was not. It was filmed in another moment. Historically, it was completely not accurate. And so it can also give cause for that. So authenticity, for me, it's about relationship.
For me, it's about knowing the context, and also it's about transparency, like knowing who the writer or who the person presenting his biases are. So automatically an Arab person, if I'm presenting something, already people view what I'm doing with their own subconscious bias, how they think I should or what my biases are. So this exists, that people, when they watch or read, that they have their own analysis or their own perception of what they're reading. And in that way, of course, films should be, I mean, people shouldn't just take what people present to them as fact. I mean, that's already, even in history books, that shouldn't be the case. I mean, we should always question whether this makes sense or not, and what are the intention, motivation, or biases of the people creating this. And that's why I try to produce films where authentic voices are representing themselves, because they are presenting their own story with their own voice. So I think that already gives some sort of authenticity to the process. And I think the transparency of the process, the problem is if you present something, like if you present, for example, an AI image as true, and you don't say it's an AI image. So that's the problem. So you are actually trying to pretend. If you are not doing that, if you are presenting something and saying, okay, so this was my process, this is what I did, like you said, how your process works, and then it's up to viewers to make sense of this and see how they believe it.
Yeah, and what about the sources? I mean, you have found these documents, right?
Yes.
And who has gathered all these testimonies? I mean, how you know that they are authentic.
They're authentic.
That your material is authentic
the
now.
first refugees who arrived to Greece from 1922 up to 1950 were still their living experience was very harsh, but nevertheless the Center of Asia Minor Studies, which started about that time, started gathering oral accounts of them in order to have an archive of their experience from before, which was recorded by historians. Historians who were actually, in order to be 100% sure, they recorded every word as they told it, in order to later see it and compare them to see if they're active. So these stories don't contradict each other also prove that's the way somehow, in layman's terms, the oral accounts process of the history works. So that's the way that these...
Okay. So another big issue is usually the vast amount of data. There is a vast amount of data, and I would like to know how you manage to organize your data in order to construct a cohesive narrative story for your documentary. Would you like to start?
I mean, how we organize. I mean, there are various ways. I don't know if our way is the best way, but it's.
I don't think that there is one way.
Okay.
Everybody has his own.
So yeah. But for me, the process is I try to unearth or reach the maximum possible. I don't just look for things that are very specific to what I'm working on. I try to collect everything because I feel like this already is a value that I can put everything for someone else after, or maybe there are sub-stories that would be valuable later on. So,
and sorry to interrupt you, but do you collaborate with the director, because you're a producer,
yes,
right? So you are doing that with the director, or how you deal?
With historian and archive producers. I mean, now the best process would be to have an archive producer on board, because they understand how to create these spreadsheets where they have all the information of the audiovisual work with all the different licenses, all the different metadata, and I think this is makes things easier to access. But this is, I mean, this is part of their job. Yeah.
Right now, you are working on your next project.
Yes.
Which is about
First
World War. And how long have you been
collecting?
Collecting.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's we have been collecting for more than a year now, and we don't feel like we found everything. Because the good thing about going back in time, where things have been coming into the public domain, so you are getting more and more archive and information, and a lot of things that were classified are becoming not, accessible. So this is creating a lot of opportunities for us, that we will get more information, and we will not have to get a license these footage, because it's already in the public domain.
And you, Johan, I think you were collecting for how long? I mean, 2-3 years.
Do you hear me? I don't hear myself. Well, I think we're living in an info dystopia, right? So there's
dystopia, this is for sure.
One of the first films for me was like coming to terms that you're a filmmaker, but you bombard it and you go out in the world and it's full of images and they come back to you and you think, gee, what can you still add as meaningfulness to this world? So for me, it's already like, okay, it's very overwhelming. How do you make sense of all that is there? But there's many criteria. There could be budget criteria, right? So you go to Getty and it's so expensive, or you have 52 music tracks, and then you can use maybe 20 seconds of that, but then we don't get the rights for that. So we didn't get the rights, for example, for some tracks in soundtrack. Like Charles Mingus was out of the, we couldn't use it because there was 5 right owners. You have the publishers and you have the 5 right owners. We were in touch with 4 and then the 5th never responded. And so you don't know what you're going to do. So they can come back when your film is out and they can say, oh, we sue you for 1 million. And then you have to retract your film. So it's very dangerous. So we had to replace it with other things. So we chose for Jorge Prado, Perez Prado, who's sort of a Cuban artist. And it was part of the Harlem Top where the Cuban leader, Fidel Castro, was invited by Malcolm X in the Teresa Hotel. And so we chose for a music that was appropriate, but like we couldn't use Charles Mingus, which was very painful. And we had edited for that for a very long time. So sometimes it's budget criteria that sort of decide, no, you cannot use it. Sometimes it's, of course, the poetic sort of opening, and you want to look for stuff that is quite sort of crucial, and then that's a priority. And if it's very strong and it says something metaphorically or in a way, in a poetic way, adds something really as another dimension to a certain series of stories or scenes in the films, then you go for it. Or you can also circumvent, like for example, we have an iPhone commercial and we have a Tesla commercial in the middle of the East Congo situation. Yeah. And of course you cannot use it, but then the way the fair use lawyer says, okay, you can use it as a quote because it's a journalistic endeavor. You can quote that iPhone, but you cannot change anything. You cannot change the sound and you cannot change the image. You have to link it. And so we could use the iPhone commercial to allude to the fact that lithium comes from that, as a conflict mineral, comes from that era. Or the Tesla, everybody thinks, oh, green energy, but nobody realizes that actually it makes use of child labor, and you go on and on and on. It's sort of green energy and it's electric energy, but it's based on a whole global sort of south extraction that is not very healthy. And so we inserted the Tesla as such, but we could not change it. So that's the political dimension, because we so much wanted to allude to that as well, but we didn't pay for it. The same in Shadow World, the previous film, we had a Lockheed commercial. So
sorry.
I love commercials. Yeah, I love commercials.
A lot of commercials in your documentary. Yes. That's amazing.
We did one film, Double Take. I always wanted to make a film with 5 commercial breaks, and it was a coffee commercial, but it's a discussion between Hitchcock and Hitchcock. And the thing is that the commercial becomes a weapon of choice because he's killed by a poisoned coffee. And it's a double ganger because it's a surrogate coffee. I'm not, well, can I, yeah, what's it again? I forgot the brand name. I'm blocking out. But there's 5 commercial breaks, and the commercial break becomes the weapon of sort of, which means the Hitchcock will going to kill the other Hitchcock. But then for the Shadow World, it's about the corruption in the defense industry. And of course, you get into this corporatocracy. The first line is that we're living in a corporate coup d'etat. And so you walk around on Times Square in New York, for example, and it's like what you see is bombarded back at you are all commercials. But this is so-called our social space. It's the urban sort of commons. But what's bombarded at you is a corporatocracy. And you have one little screen that maybe is an artist project, but I think artists should be all around. We are the imagination of the world, sort of. I think that should be projected back in the social space, but not corporate brands. And so as a filmmaker, I felt like in this info dystopia, it was time to hijack those images and turn them back around and sort of claim, look, this is a space that also belongs to us. It's a space that also belongs to us. So if you talk about archives, it's also about the public memory. It's actually what archives are sort of what we share socially. But why should it be owned by a corporation? You go to Getty, it's so expensive. And so we made a film about airplane hijacking, but most of the images belong. We're actually sponsoring ABC News. We're sponsoring Disney. But it's very schizophrenic. I do believe you can sort of step into mainstream because otherwise you're not on TV. But you sort of, it's very schizophrenic. You sponsor mainstream media by paying for access to the archives. while you start criticizing them. It's very ludicrous. It's sort of very nuts. And we live in a very contradictory world. And anyway, I keep on talking. Maybe it's...
No, that is amazing.
But the social memory is a very important aspect, because who owns that social memory, and why should it be corporations? It's with everything, you know, right? So with big Agora, with big tech, it's like we have access to technology, or we can throw it on YouTube, but it's a commons disguised as a corporation. And so it's, again, a corporate sort of owned public memory, and that's what archives sort of allude to. It's like we talked about yesterday about Google. Why should all the books that are public domain suddenly belong to Google's on Google Books, and you have to pay for it? Who wants to pay for it? I tell all my students in school, if they're not like playing the big arena of money, then pirate it, go for it. You know, it's time that everybody pirates, because the big thieves are the big studios. It's the big corporations who own our public memory, and it's time to pirate all that stuff. But that's, of course, another strategy. If you're playing sort of arte as part of your project, then you have to clear the rights, right? Yeah, so it's always a double-edged sword, but I think it's so crucial that there are pirates, because pirates come about when you know, the pirates, going off on a tangent. But anyway, pirates was disgruntled people who worked on the ships, who were like second-rate citizens, and they had to fight for empire. It was like they had to fight for Empire England or Empire Spain. And the pirates came about because they didn't agree with the system. Anyway, I think it's an interesting allegory.
But this drives me to the next question that has to do with how you secure clearance rights. This is another big obstacle in this creative process. And would you like to talk about that?
I pirate. No, it's not something we clear because we make animation, so it's more or less...
but you have to. You don't have to secure the rights for.
But this is the difference, because if you need specific footage and you can't have access to it, you have to find an alternative or find the money to pay it. We can just not draw it. So,
look, now you oblige me to jump in animation and ask another question. Like, so animation is just a solution to...
Oh, I really like it.
To budget problems?
No.
It can't be that. Animation is more than that, in my opinion.
It's a great way to incorporate more than just reality, more than just fiction. I mean, we could shoot and reenact the sequence we want to animate and rotoscope over it. We could also take an archive footage and rotoscope over it. But the ability to take the authenticity of a specific moment from one archive footage and another thing from another archive footage and combine them to create an extra reality which is not present, not in the original archive footage, nor the thing that we could imagine as filmmakers. So that's the great experience of using animation for this kind of documentary project for us. And it's never ending. I mean, we are going to do this for 3 years. That's how good it is. We're very happy for it.
Great. Kesmat, your experience with access and clearance, actually, rights?
Well, my first encounter with getting access to footage was getting 1 minute footage of the 1950s of Egypt, and I was doing it for a biography film of an activist in Egypt, and I had to pay what exactly I had to pay to make the film for the 1 minute. So that was how absurd it was. Like 1 minute in the film cost as much as I had to do the whole 40 minutes. So that's ridiculous, in my opinion, and I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it should be like that. I think we should question the ethics of these institutions, as you were saying, and especially with relation to countries who were colonized and who don't have access to their archive. So I think this is really a problem that I think needs much more advocacy and impact, and also organizing like filmmakers to come together, because there are declarations of restitution for artifacts, and they include audiovisual. I mean, the UNESCO has, you know, acknowledged this. So it needs more maybe work, and of course we are maybe lacking the resources to really push back, because these big corporations, they have all the lawyers in the world and all the money in the world, and we are small producers that are trying to make films, you know. So it's a very big imbalance. That is a problem, and I think but I still think we have a lot to do, and we can actually do something about it. With regards to animation, of course, animation is a very very good way of also claiming the history, in my opinion, because archive is limited to where there is still power dynamics in archive, because who was taking the image, where the camera was put, what was happening when the camera was not there. So there is a lot of things that were happening when the camera was not there, and so in that way, for example, the project I'm working on, we are trying to you know, use animation to really bring the experience of one person within this big events of the First World War. So yeah, I think that the animation is really a powerful tool.
Mm-hmm. And you have also created animated movies, but it was, I haven't seen though.
Maybe it's off topic. I can show some stuff. We can interrupt with a little bit of a footage that could be very questionable. But yeah, also animation could also be special effects. Like when we hear Hitchcock, talking with Hitchcock, we Photoshop 2 cameos, and so you see Hitchcock watching Hitchcock on the street. But it depends, like animation is very big, and what I'm also always a bit cautious of is that with animation it can become illustration, and that sort of, I think it should inherently in its own right sort of trying to carve out a poetic space that is inherent to that sort of medium. And I think when it becomes illustration, it can easily become sort of redundant. So I have the same feeling with talking heads and documentary. It's like there's something where I feel that if you add another space on top of the voice, you open something up. And that third space is quite interesting. It's what Trinh Minh Ha talks about. The third space is something where a poetic sort of, a poetic anchor comes in, where it sort of takes you to another place that can open up the reading of what's been talked about. And I think that's sort of, for me, an interesting sort of means to work with.
Animation is the creative interpretation, and the archive and the documentary is the historical reality, let's say. So
yeah, but even with documentary, you could like what we did with sort of the grading, for example, in soundtrack to Curator, the grading is we have tried to make it as an interpretation of that authentic, but whatever that is authentic, right? Yeah. So I always question that, because even if the camera is present, then who's holding the camera? Who's able to document? Even if the camera is present, there's a lot of problems there. Like in Vietnam, you see somebody being shot, you're gonna shoot it and you have the opportunity to shoot it, or you're gonna like help. There's a lot of ethical questions about who holds the camera as well. So, you know, I can show an image that for me it's precisely that I think, gee, what is that? So, and you reclaim it in a way where you give a different, invest it with a different meaning.
The way we use animation is a bit different because we have a problem with many choices. We can't stand too many choices. So the first thing we do, even if we're working on a fiction screenplay or in the archive footage of the oral accounts, is to restrict ourselves. So we audition everything. We try to find the perfect material to tell the story. And if the story is not told already by the primary material, which in this case is the oral accounts, then maybe it should be given another thought on what is its place to the story, to the core of the story. The same thing happens with the animation. Because we came into animation with our previous film, trying to use animation to make a very grounded film that maybe shouldn't have been made if it wasn't for animation, because it's too grounded and too everyday life. So that's the restriction we found to make this one, the Women of Asia Minor, is that in this era, in 1922, there were the big bulky cameras. The frame rate was not precise because it was hand cranked. The footage was not actually shot at the moment of what should be important, but what the person who paid this to be filmed. So if you show some, maybe an execution or something violent, should be shot from the point of view of someone who enjoys it, which gives a completely different
very interesting the way you proceed.
Point of view. It might not be the perfect shot, the perfect use of the imagination and the power that animation has, but for us, transfers us to that space and time, even if it's something that gruesome. Or maybe another example was that some soldiers who fought in the First War in the Balkans joined the Turkish army, even though they were Greeks, which was testified by many testimonies and is written. But there was one testimony that told that those people took oaths to the guns. So if we find an archive material of Turkish people kissing the gun, taking the gun, kissing the gun and going, and then one of them takes a gun, makes the sign of the cross and then goes, this is something that we couldn't have thought it by ourselves. So what should be the point of view that should be sought? What should be the lens? How can you not just recreate the event, but use the point of view that should be if it existed as an archive material? That's the process we follow to this film.
Oh, we are looking forward, really. Okay, now there are so many digital... actually, before I go on with the next question, I wanted to, Johan, to tell us your experience with the archives you had for the coup d'etat, for the soundtrack to the coup d'etat, because I think it's exactly the opposite of Kesmat's experience. I mean, you found most of your archives in Belgium, right? Because we were talking about colonies and archive material, and Kesmat was telling us how difficult it is to find material in Egypt. But in opposition with your case...
Well, we also have Abdel Nasser in the film, so we have Egyptian archives. But it's true.
Yes.
Yes. But I'm with, I mentioned it before, George Nzolo Natalia, who's a Congolese academic scholar, who's now actually holding the seat to the UN for the Congo. He claims also that, you know, a lot of the history even, it's not just archival, but a lot of the history is written outside of his country. Because with Joseph Désiré Mobutu, with his kleptocracy, who was in power for a long time, he was not allowed to speak up. And so, but also there's that, still that colonial relationship as well, that indeed in the Africa Museum, which was Leopold II's museum, a lot of the archives pre-independence are there. And so, but even now that a lot of the colonials are becoming a dying race, and sort of they donate their footage to the Africa Museum, it's quite interesting to actually explore that colonial archival imagery and then embed it in a way where it becomes something completely different. But it's not just the Africa Museum. We had the UN. I explored everything from sort of a little bit before mid-September. It's like the 15th General Assembly 1960 started around the 20th of September all the way to the 12th of October 1960. And we watched all the speeches. Eisenhower, Nikita Khrushchev, Jawahar al-Nassar, there was Abdel Nasser was there, Sekou Kwame Nkrumah. It's all these non-aligned leaders that were so crucial for this 50th General Assembly. And we have to know also that Nikita Khrushchev invited all heads of state, which was a precedent, and they all, like, for a big part came. And before, heads of state never joined the United Nations. And so you see all these first independent leaders giving a talk. There's also Fidel Castro, who gives his first speech at the United Nations. And also the big absentee is Patrice Lumumba, because he sort of said, let me give my cause, and he wrote a letter to Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld said, I'm going to try to arrange it, but underneath, in sort of non-informal, he said to the US ambassador, don't give him a plane ticket. And the US ambassador in the Congo refused to give him a visa. And so the big absentee, but everybody was talking about the Congo, and the big absentee is Patrice Lumumba. So it's also absence is also, the absent is also part of history writing or non-writing, but it's as much as important as sort of which is documented. But what was the question about the archives? So we had the UN archives, but what I thought was quite interesting when we contacted the daughter of André Blouin, Yves Blouin, she said, here I have a roll of film that I never developed. And
yeah, this was another question. How easy it was to get those archives? You mentioned so many people, but I'm wondering, Blouin, she was friendly and she wanted to collaborate. But what about the rest of the? I mean, the UN. How you got that?
Well, it's $5 per second. So
exactly, give us a price. $5 per second. I mean, it's.
And you can buy a package. You can buy a package, and say, look, and then you reel and deal. We had Judy Aliantus, who was also archivist on Shadow World, and she's very, very good. So she just worked with Spike Lee. She's top-notch when it comes to archives. Okay. And she got us access to a lot of archives that we never would have been able to find. So, for example, the audio of William Burden, who was the US ambassador to Brussels. And we have him literally saying in audio, we were plotting to kill Lumumba. And he was the president of the MoMA. Of the MoMA. And it's like, it was so nuts to find this footage. He was president of the MoMA, but he was a CIA asset. And so we never could have found it without her. She is expensive, but people who are home in the archives, they sort of know all the ins and outs of archival sort of situations, and they can make a deal, or they had make deals in the past, so that they can reduce your budget. I'm talking really production side. It's like it's nuts and bolts. It's like, but it's nuts. I don't agree as well. I don't agree that our public memory is owned by corporations. I think, and definitely when it becomes even part of a colonial situation, I think something has to be rectified. But and I think it's so crucial to also like go against it. And anyway, we talked about piracy, but there's a lot of intimate archives as well that I think that are part of the film. Like Nkoli John Bofani was very happy that he's so open about that we could use his archives. But the archives stem also from a very mixed situation. Like he was a kid 6 years old when independence happened in the Congo, and his mother is Congolese from the north of Congo, but his stepfather, Belgium. He kidnapped and forced his mother to marry him. He's a rubber baron, but he happened to have a camera. Oh. And so it's a colonial gaze. You could see it also in his family pictures as a colonial gaze. But there's also something else, because when Jean Bofani talks about his stepfather, he said, yeah, my mother when she was 8, I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but he says it also in public in interviews, that he says, my mother came to me when she was 8 and said, how much I hated your father. But they had so many kids. He has half-sisters. And there's something also very intimate and beautiful in that footage. It's so this contradictory thing. There's a colonial gaze, but there's also poetry in that gaze. So it's sort of very double. And we, of course, it's again that sort of tension between speaking for and speaking with. And we always were sending back, like we invited Jean Bofani many times to the studio, and then you open up a dialogue. And so it's very tricky. I was always cautious as being sort of a good colonialist. I'm part of Belgium, so I'm part of that tradition, although I was kept in the dark. It was the empire of silence. But that dialogue is important, that you have a dialogue between sort of, you sit at the table of reconciliation and you have two parties. And again, there, I think we're all colonized in our head. But it's also structurally. It's structurally, and how those access to the archives exist is also structurally still very colonial. I don't know if that makes sense, but so it's, there's not such just corporate archives, there's also intimate archives, but they also come with a history.
And actually, are you still digging in physical material, or because there are so many digital now, but do you still rely on physical archives?
Yes, we visited the British Archives, and they have everything physical. Not everything is digitized, so that was very valuable because they have a lot of documentation of details, of small details from when they were in Egypt. So this is very valuable. Another thing that was really surprising for me is that we found a lot of images on eBay, and that was really, really crazy. But yeah, I mean, we found a lot of images just being sold, and that was actually good, because then it was also a kind of retrieving. These images also had a value. So suddenly we are doing much more than what we need for the film, but it still feels really good to bring back these images, yeah.
So what, I have opened many things, but I thought maybe 1 minute clip which never made it into the film Shadow World, which is about the defense industry, but we had used it as sort of a credit section. And it's a Palestinian poet, Suher Hamad. We collaborated with her, and I added the images to that. And she's reading her own poem. And so it's just found it's not found footage, it's footage from everywhere. It's not cleared, it's all stolen, but we have thrown it on the internet, and so far it's okay.
Yeah, let's watch it.
So just as an intermezzo, and then we can go to the Q&A. Yeah?
Yeah. And
there's much more, but I think there's no time to, like, unless you insist, but.
Let's watch that, and then we'll go on with your extract.
So what I will, and I think it's appropriate for what's going on in the world, so.
That's fine.
I don't know if the volume's going to be okay, but.
I will not dance to your war drum.
Lights.
I will not dance to that beat.
Can you switch off the lights?
I know that beat. It is lifeless. I know intimately that skin you are hitting. It was alive once, hunted, stolen, stretched. I will not dance to your drummed up war. I will not pop, spin, break for you. I will not hate for you or even hate you. I will not mourn the dead with murder nor suicide. I will not dance to bombs because everyone is dancing. Everyone can be wrong. I will not lend my name nor my rhythm to your beat. I will dance and resist and dance and persist and dance. This heartbeat is louder than death. Your war drum ain't louder than this breath.
Nice.
So this project started with this footage that we found at the Imperial War Museum, and then from that footage we found also a memoir of one of the workers that was taken to France. So that was really helped us build this story based on his account. So we have the animation with his point of view, and the archive as the context, in a way. But we're still in development, so
great. Yeah. And let's watch women.
Ο άντρας μου πήγε στρατιώτη το 1918 στον Τούρκικο στρατό. Τι φώτιση του ήρθε και πήγε και πλήθηκε μέσα σε μια λίμνη, ήταν Γενάρης μήνας, πούντιασε. Μας στείλανε ένα γράμμα και έλεγε πως πέθανε. Πέθανε και γλίτωσε.
Τρεις μέρες μετά την Κυριακή του Θωμά στα 22 βγήκανε ντελάλιδες στους δρόμους και φωνάζανε. Όλοι οι άντερ χριστιανοί να μαζευτούν μέσα στην εκκλησιά, τον Άι Δημήτρη.
Ο δικός μου συγχωρεμένος μου λέει, Μαριάνθη, δεν θα μας ξαναδείτε.
Το πρωί σηκώθηκε ένας να πάει στον μπαξέ του, τον σφάξαν. Δεύτερος που έμενε στον μπαξέ του ξεκίνησε να φέρει ζαρζαβατικά και τον σφάξαν. Οι σιδηροδρομικοί, εργάτες και μηχανικοί που πήγαιναν στις δουλειές τους, τους σφάξαν. Μάζευαν τους ανθρώπους, ερχόταν ο Δήμιος, ακόνιζε το μαχαίρι.
Μόνο οι γυναίκες μείναμε. Το σπίτι μας τα αφήναμε και τι μας περίμενε δεν το ξέραμε.
Λέγαμε πως θα γυρίσουμε πάλι.
Και αυτό δεν ήταν τίποτα.
Ένα μήνα μείναμε στο νησί. Ούτε παράθυρο, ούτε πόρτα είδαμε ανοιχτή.
Εγώ του λέω δεν μένω εδώ. Άμα ήθελα να μείνω εχμάλωτη, έμενα και στη Μικρασία.
Την τρίτη μέρα περνούσαν απ' έξω από εκεί που μας είχαν φυλακωμένες κάτι χριστιανοί από το Φερτέκι. Αυτοί δεν ξέραν από βάσανα. Αυτοί φύγαν από τα χωριά τους και πήραν και τη γάτα τους μαζί.
Παναγιά μου, αν είναι να γλιτώσω τώρα, δώσ' μου θάρρος να βγω από την πόρτα. Και αν είναι να πιαστώ, δώσ' μου φόβο να κάτσω.
Μείνανε εκεί πάνω στο χώμα, τυλιγμένοι στα κορίτσια μου. Εμένα ήταν της κανόνας μου, δεν πέθανε την ίδια ώρα. Ακόμα και τώρα μου
Great. Thank you very much. Now the floor is yours. If you have any questions, any remarks, any comments, yes, please.
Okay, well, my question is about how public domain works right now with videos and music, because I thought there were some laws that, well, if the singer, for example, is dead for like 70 years, his music is public domain and a filmmaker can use it for free. But how does it work with the videos? Everything is owned by someone, or there are some free videos of, for example, Egypt of 1950s and stuff?
Well, in the case of this footage, for example, it should be in the public domain, but they can still sell it to you under the pretense of it being costs of digitization. So actually, they don't sell you the license, but you still have to go through them in a way. And yeah, it's how it is. Maybe you have...
Yeah, it's such a huge field. Like if you go to the National Library of Congress in Washington, and at the time you could still take a camera and you could load, for example, Universal Newsreels. All of that is public domain. But Universal Newsreels is also with Getty. Universal Newsreels is also with ABC News. But if you go through them, you have to pay, for example, $300 per second or $800 per second, depending on your domain. So there's and you shouldn't, because they're not allowed to do that. They don't allow to do that. But sometimes they have better archival footage. But the National Library of Congress, they have all the originals. So that's one, for example. And these are Universal Newsreels, is what was shown as newsreels in the cinema before television was there. It depends. Like we stole the iPhone. I shouldn't say steal, but we were quoting iPhone. iPhone commercial, we could get away with it, but we sort of asked we had one very good fair use lawyer. And there's a lot of circumvention that you could sort of get away with. And indeed, one rule is 70 years, but then it could still be republished by someone else, and then it still has publishing rights when it comes to music. It's the same for authorship. But then Disney, for example, Mickey Mouse, yeah. Unless you have Disney on your production team, but yeah. So it's if you have, for example, with Shadow World, which is a film about sort of a journalistic endeavor into the weapons trade. We got away because it's sort of, you quote, because of journalistic reasons. Like, I think half of the film is fair used. And it's archives from beginning to end, except for 30 minutes. It's a 94-minute film, but we have 30, 40 minutes of talking heads, or less. But the talking heads, we have B camera, so you see them often not talking while they're talking. I don't know if I'm...
Okay.
I don't like talking heads. But it depends. It depends, like... and like... I think in the art world, there's sort of more of a gray zone. Like, I don't know if people know Christian Markley, 24-hour, the clock which is 24 hours. It's 24 hours of Hollywood footage, but he got away with it. And he was not paid for it. Histoire du cinéma, it's 12 series of Godard talking about cinema. They didn't sue Godard, and he was quoting all those films. So there's always a gray zone where you can get away with it if you contextualize in a way where maybe it's justified. There's Douglas Gordon, who's a media artist who sold his 24-hour Psycho. He slowed down Hitchcock's film 24-hour Psycho to 24 hours, and it's bought by the museum in Hamburg, the Kunsthalle in Hamburg, and they didn't pay for it because the laws in Germany are as such that actually you could also fair use when it comes in the context of a museum. But this is it's not like a film that is made for TV. TV is a different thing again. And so Adam Curtis, for example, he works for BBC. Everything is right in form of archives. It's owned by BBC, and they pay a fee yearly also for music and stuff. And so he only shows it on BBC, and then he throws it on YouTube or on social media, and it's for free that you can watch it on all these social engines. But for BBC, he works with BBC. So the context there dictates what sort of you have to pay for or not. You have to look for like from case to case, I think. And I agree. I think it's rights they have tripled. They have like for example Shadow World, things have doubled, and suddenly rights is sort of a big commercial thing that is being sort of out there, and a lot of lawyers are making money, and it shouldn't be. Why should it be again reinscribed into the corporate game? So I feel it's time to get away from that profit paradigm to a social paradigm. Anyway, that's another issue. But I think it ties in again to the same sort of worldview we have, where everything is being sort of expropriated for gain, for money, for profit. And it's the same with agriculture. It's the same with your genetic sort of footprint. DNA is now being privatized. Why should it be privatized? Anyway, big questions. But
big questions. Another question, or... Yes, please.
Thanks a lot for this useful conversation. I'm Marina, filmmaker from Moldova. My question is, could you please elaborate a little bit more on your artistic and ethical approach when portraying violence and pain through animation? Thank you.
Violence and pain. Okay, this is tough. Should I tell them the hard example or not? Okay, listen. It's not important for a good story to get across, to use violence, but or to portray violence in a way that seems real. But we were shocked to find, because we usually watch films from the past. So watching what's happening today often shocks us like we are old men, because we saw what happens in the video games. And the violence in the video games is so desensitized. I mean, you can chop a person to pieces and you won't feel nothing. So the graphic depiction of violence in the media in general, not only in the films, has lost, in our opinion, its ethical value. It shouldn't be something that you have to shock in order to feel the reality, but if we choose to show violence, it should be felt like a violence. I mean, the example I was talking about was that, I don't know how to put it, but you can't cut a person's head straight off with a sword. You have to somehow show it. So in order to see what those women give the testimonies about the beheadings of their fellow citizens saw, and the details they were describing, it's not about us using every detail, but if you read it once, you read it twice, you read it four, you have to somehow address it. So in order to do it, there are no actual footage of that era of Turkish rebels showing off heads, but there are a lot of footage of ISIS. So we had a few nightmares for some weeks. We saw a lot of footage, and decided that a few moments that should be in the film, if we chose to show the violence, should be felt like violence, like something ugly, sudden, and that you don't want to see again. Not exactly to repulse you, like something that it's made to repulse you, but something that it's made to feel unnatural to do to another person. So that's our point of view.
I think it's a big question, because also I feel suddenly, I feel that so in the last 10 years there's a sanitation of violence. And is that helpful or not? Because it obscures also the fact that there's things happening in the world that are extremely violent, but it's as if everything is cleaned up in Western media. And so when we interviewed Chris Hedges, who was a former New York Times journalist, he sort of gave us several examples of how footages were sent to the BBC and they were cleaned up or not even shown because they were too violent. But because they were violent, he would actually cause a reaction of like maybe a counter manifestation. It's only when violent images came back from Vietnam that actually something changed in the United States. And I think we live also in a very sanitized world where the access to violence is sort of like being obscured. Not to say that actually, as you say, that you should have gratuitous violence. I think violence should be also contextualized. It's the same with sort of the truth value of images. If you can empathize and you actually create a story where you feel, because it's also about emotions, then if something is violent done to that person, it becomes very, like you get affected by it because it's sort of contextualized. But I'm with like Judith Butler, she wrote this book Frames, about frames of war. And it's sort of very often also what's outside of the frame. If people are dehumanized and they're not in the picture and you don't see them, or they're not sort of named or labeled, or they're out of the frame, sometimes it's easier to kill them. And so what happens with Gaza, I feel, it's like there's a dehumanization going on where it's also outside of the media and it's sanitized, and then it's also manipulation. So violence can also be an agent, but it's Frans Fanon used to say non-violence is the privilege of the ones who are colonizing. And so what you do with that? So violence is a tough subject. It's a tough subject. And I agree, we have, when I was making Shadow World, I had to meditate 3 times a day because it was seeping into the body. And you start dreaming about it, and it's seeping into you. Even if you say it doesn't do me anything, I think there's something also where I feel that we actually have a collective trauma. We have a collective trauma of a world that is disappearing. We have an enormous defense industry. It's a big elephant that never talked about. And we have a world that's about to disappear, and all the budget is disappearing to privatized corporations who buy more weapons and more weapons and more weapons. And I don't think, I don't think the NATO is an obsolete sort of situation. It's like, we don't need NATO. Who is the enemy? It's not sort of, the defense industry is making an enemy. And we're being geared and we're being drilled into sort of this world of violence, but maybe inherently we're people who don't want violence. But I think I'm with Frans de Waal, who says man is an oxymoron. We're a living contradiction. We're a living contradiction. Anyway, this is a huge subject matter, but it was a big part of Shadow World, but we sort of set it against sort of, we talked about it as well, fear and love. Like Machiavelli said, there's 2 choices. Right, the prince, there's 2 choices. You choose the path of love or the path of fear. And if you drill fear into society, it's the ruler who's in control. But if you rule by love or by connection or social fabric, it's actually democracy who's in charge. And so fear, we have become consumers of fear, which is different than violence. We have become consumers not of violence, but consumers of fear. And fear is a means to control. And if you fear the other, it's also the othering outside of the frame. The othering makes that actually is dehumanized. And that fear makes that you don't feel the other anymore. And that's the same trauma. We're all being drilled into fear and in trauma, but we miss the connection to that otherness. And it's so important to feel that trauma, which is relational again. Anyway, I keep on preaching, sorry. There's another question.
Thank you. Bruce Lee from Modern Times Review. There is so much, millions of images and film clips from Gaza and Ukraine. That's another archive. It's a contemporary archive. Who has the rights to this? They're just floating around. I mean, you as filmmakers, would you just, is that fair use if you pick from this contemporary archive we have now? Would you say that? Fair use?
Well, I think the owners of the archive or the people that are posting should have the first right to say where their images will be used, because yeah, but still, I mean, I think in that way it should go back to the people posting, and then you should access it through them. I mean, it's about access. It's not maybe about money, but it's about working with the community, the original community. I mean, that's also like, if we want to talk about ethics of how to do things. In Canada, for example, they have a way of how people, native, do their films. It has the community has to agree, or they have to kind of allow this to happen, because it's kind of re-examining their history, or so I think the context is important, and who's doing the film or who's using the image is now more important, I think. Yeah.
And talking about Ukraine, yesterday Chernov got the Academy Award for 20 days in Mariupol. And he finished his speech saying that cinema forms memory and memory forms history. And I would like to finish here. One last, okay, because it's you.
Again, in the topic of violence, because I agree with the perception of like having one image, and this image can present me. I can present this image in a different way, so a different context I will give to that image, and a different person will present this image with a different context. So, what is the difference between? Because I'm also a new filmmaker, and I'm trying to see the limit where an artist that follows the the path of love, let's say, or the beauty, using violent images, is it different of propagandist colonial newsreel using the same violent image? What is the limit and what is the difference of that, the different perception of the two?
I'm trying to think about an example, because I think it's case to case, because all that image, what does it stand for? Violence is just as truth and the ownership of images, like all of that is in flux. So do you have something specific in mind?
I saw your film Dial History when I was 18. Maybe I was a very romantic little girl, and I got shocked because of some archive that I used to see in news, you know. Now I saw your movie yesterday, and I didn't feel the same. I don't know if there's if you see also a difference on using violent images on your work. I felt more this poetic thing you wanted to say and your context, but I don't know. I would like to tell me your opinion on using a violent image and how you take the risk to use it in a way.
But can you be specific about which one in Dial History?
Which one? Which image? I'm not really sure now. I just have this bubble in my mind many years ago.
Because also as a filmmaker you grow, and yeah, you do. And like, if I would make Dial History today, it would be very different. So, you know, I grow, I change, and my values and image and the way I see the world is also very different. But the world has changed too. The world has changed too, because when Dial History was made, nobody was hijacking, or they did in Chechnya, and that was sort of the last documented hijacking in the film. And it was made a couple of years prior to 9/11. But what's in the film what happened is that the film confirmed reality, because 9/11 was sort of, for me, the result of Dial History. And it was also, being a filmmaker, you know, we talked about piracy, and I think there's something to be said about the big thieves, right? The big thieves, name it the empires, England and Spain, with their boats, and then pirates sort of were stealing back from them. And you had pirate utopias. And you had pirate utopias in Morocco and in the Caribbean. And of course, they were not ideal, but there was sort of an egalitarianism, and there's a lot being written about pirate utopias by Hakim Bey, for example. And so piracy can also, which is maybe a violent act, but then know that we live in a world that maybe is in a way so also very violent. And it's not. I also think there's more acts of love in the world than actually violent acts, because that's what we push to believe in the media. Anyway, that's another story. But we have to stop.
We have to stop. I'm sorry, but
we can continue.
I would like to thank Kesmat, Aris, and Johan. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, all of you, for coming, and all the best. Good luck for your movies. Thank you. Thank you. It was so interesting. Thank you so much.